So good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the Dress for Success virtual learning program. My name is Rekha Verma. I'm the programming consultant at Dress for Success. Our theme today is to build authentic connections through storytelling. We know stories resonate with everyone and stays with them more than the numbers, data, or insights. And that stories can be a powerful medium in an interview situations, on job, and in life. I'm very excited to welcome all of you and to a wonderful speaker tonight, this evening, Neve Farrelly, who is a consultant with Humphrey Group. But I'll quickly invite Neve to introduce herself.
Great. Thank you, Rika. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on storytelling. First, I want to say a big thank you to all the Dress for Success team for having me. A lot goes into these sessions in terms of technical support and setup, so I really appreciate all of your help in getting us set up and all connected today. And just in general, for the work that you do, I'm consistently amazed by the work at Dress for Success, the wonderful community of women that it brings together, the clients, the supporters. It is work that is so needed and so appreciated. And to each of you for joining. So thank you for committing this hour to yourselves for development or for learning or for whatever the purpose is that you've joined. As Rika said, my name is Neve and I am, yes, a consultant with the Humphrey Group. And I am, in terms of my story, what has me so interested and passionate about not only the work that Dress for Success does, but in general, when it comes to women's leadership, women's empowerment, storytelling, and all things sort of communication is, I myself am an immigrant from Ireland. I moved here at a time when, I was young and looking to start my career. And it was having communities like this that I could lean on. That was so wonderful to be able to learn, to grow, to have a network, and to also build skills to be able to use as I interviewed and as I started to network with people. And so through that, I built my passion for communication, the power of connection through communication, and that really led me to my work at the Humphrey Group. And in terms of the Humphrey Group, what we do is very specific in terms of that communication skill building. So we work with leaders at all levels in organizations to help teach communication skills when it comes to showing their leadership. So in particular, understanding and expressing their values, including and communicating with others in a meaningful and engaging way. And this is really where the power of stories comes into it. And of course, bringing ideas forward in a way that inspires others. And so today you're here specifically to talk about one element of that, which is storytelling. And so I'm sure there are a variety of reasons why you've all joined today. It could be personal learning, curiosity. You may be seeing that it's an emerging or necessary skill in your role, the use of stories. It may be recommended to you by a colleague, a friend, or maybe you're just passionate in general about this topic. But regardless, as I said, it shows a commitment to your leadership and your growth. And another thing amongst everything that's going on right now is we are all getting used to this new way of being together in a virtual space and staying connected and engaged. So I'm going to close this poll, Rika, if that's okay with you, if you believe that we've got enough participants who've in that.
Yeah,
is that
so Neve, we can do that. I can see that we have, I think, 29, 30 participants on the call. And before we, start with the formal part of this session, I quickly wanted to welcome everybody else that I didn't have a chance to welcome in the beginning. Right, so very warm welcome to everyone. A few ground rules or housekeeping rules for this session. One is that like you to know that we're recording this session, which means that we're recording the content of this session, including the discussions, but we will not be recording your face or your voice for privacy reasons. All the questions will be taken through the chat option. So please use the chat option, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. Use it for suggestions, use it for ideas, any thoughts, any story that you want to share. And if you have a question, please direct your question directly to me. There is an option where you can change everyone to just, directly to Rekha. So please use that. We don't want the questions to get lost in all the discussions which usually happen in a virtual session like this. And we'd like to see as many questions addressed as possible. We did talk about poll that we had in the beginning. If you haven't done that, I don't know, Neve, is that option still open?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so if you haven't had a chance to complete those 5 questions, please do it now. And just to say that we will also, towards the end of the session, we will run another poll to kind of see what was the learning or the level of participants before starting this session and the traction that we were able to accomplish during this session. So it's a poll which is personally very, very important and useful for both Dress for Success as well as our speaker, Neve. It would help us be better at what we do. So thank you so much in advance for all your time and your investment in this learning. It means a lot to us. And over to Neve on that note.
Great. All right. So I will give you a couple more seconds just to finish off that poll. And then I'm going to launch another one because, as I said, we're all getting used to this way of being engaged in virtual sessions like this. And I'm sure you're seeing lots of different webinars and learning sessions pop up in your social media and, emails and things like that. And I'd love to get a sense from you all how you plan to be engaged in this session. And I want you to be honest. Maybe you're a 2 as, on a scale of 1 to 10 because you're juggling homeschooling with your children, you're dealing with work emails, dinner is an hour away and you're thinking what you're going to do for that. Maybe you're a 5. You're not sure what might happen over the next hour. Maybe something might come up that you'll have to deal with. Or maybe you're right up there at a 10. You have found a quiet room, you've put the do not disturb sign on the door, there's no distractions, you are fully locked in for this session. Whatever you are, when I launch this poll, I want you to check that number. And this is an opportunity for you to just reflect with yourself in terms of, how you plan to be engaged. And perhaps that you can even move that by a decimal by, closing that extra browser that you have open on your screen, putting in your headphones, turning the volume up just a little bit. So with that, I'm going to launch that poll. All right. So you should all see it right now on your screen. Rekha, if you can just let me know that that's in front of you, then I'll assume that it's in front of everybody else.
I don't see it yet.
Okay, I can see people are participating, so I'll take that as a good sign. All right, that's great. I'm starting to see some 7s, 8s, 9s. That's wonderful. All right. So, as I said, we're here today to talk about the art of storytelling in communication. So the first thing that we, of course, need to get started are stories. So what I want you to do as you finish up with this poll is I want you to think of something you really like to do. It could be a hobby, an interest, maybe it's a place that you really want to go where you're thinking about the first thing you're going to do when all of these lockdown restrictions are lifted. So just think of one thing. And I've done the same, and I'm going to share that as an example with you now. So for me, I chose a hobby, and a hobby of mine is singing. I sing a lot and it makes me happy. So I can't imagine that me telling you this fact really inspired you or made you feel even more connected to me. And I can't be sure that it's something that, if we met again, or if you were telling someone about me, that would be something that you would remember. But maybe if there was a story in there. So maybe if I said, I love singing. I started when I was very young. I would practice in my room all the time. I would sing along to CDs or on drives with my folks in the car. And my parents really encouraged this passion that I had and sent me to stage school, where I was so nervous the first time I went. And, I could barely breathe when I was asked to sing in front of lots of people. But then over time, that got so much easier, and I met some amazing performers. And had a great chance to really nurture that passion of mine. And I've actually been able to continue that into my adulthood and do it on a regular basis. So as you can see, there's detail there, there's some color there. It allows you to sort of get a sense of how this has been a part of my life, how it's something that is important to me. And what I'm really trying to get at, I'm just going to close this slide, is stories are how we generate excitement and connection, both to other people, but also what's important to us. And how do we do this? How do we build that relationship? You know, we need to appeal to more than just the rational brain. And this is proven in science. Behavioral science has told us that people are not 100% rational 100% of the time. You know, we're not just these machines who assess the validity of an argument. We are actually influenced by all kinds of factors. You know, in fact, we are often influenced probably more by what we feel and believe than we often are by facts or numbers or data. And I don't think we have to look further than really Disney or Hollywood to look for examples of how stories have moved us in some way. And with that, knowing that stories engage different parts of the brain, that's really why people listen to stories. You know, they activate more areas of our brain when we listen to information. And really that's the feeling brain. And it becomes engaged, and that's what helps us to feel more inspired when those two sides of our brains, the rational and the feeling, are activated. And so I'm going to ask you to participate in another poll with me. And this one is really to understand, when it comes to stories, how comfortable are you telling stories right now as part of your communication? I see that when some of you were participating in the initial poll by Dress for Success to see what your understanding of this topic were, there were some of you who are quite knowledgeable around something like this. So I'd be interested to see sort of right now where you are coming into this session, how comfortable you are with this. All right, so we'll launch that second one. And I would love to, hear your thoughts around that, your comfort level around storytelling. Maybe it's something you've tried before and it worked really well. Maybe you've been discouraged by stories from some that you've heard in the past as part of business or everyday communication. And so what really makes stories so powerful, as what I'm getting at, is that they activate both our feeling brain and our rational brain. So I'm sure you've heard people say, you know, that really connected with my head and my heart, or we have to listen to both our head and our heart. And I think that gets at this kind of idea of our rational brain and our feeling brain. And as a result, we remember stories more than information. There's that stickiness to it when someone connects a story or gives you context around information. You feel more connected when we share stories, or even we hear stories shared with us. We have this different understanding, and it's a better understanding of information when someone gives us an example to help us put that into context. And of course, we feel compelled to act on stories that inspire us because they paint a picture in our minds of what could be. So we see this quite a lot with advertising or campaigns that you see on the TV or on social media. You know, brands do a fantastic job of bringing stories in, personal stories about people, about communities, that really help us to feel inspired and compelled to act on something. So that's great. I see that some of you are, the main result here is that some of you are feeling somewhat comfortable, which means that you've used this before, which is great. And so I hope to be able to, as we continue this conversation, be able to give you even more confidence with a specific tool around how you can use stories even more. So with that, I think from what I've been telling you, or I hope that we're all kind of sold on why storytelling is valuable. It helps us connect and inspire. And so what you're going to learn in today's session is really three aspects of storytelling. So understanding why tell stories, especially in your business or professional world. When to tell stories. So when is it a good time to think about, okay, this will be a great opportunity to tell a story. And then I'm going to leave you with a concrete tool or framework that you can use as you start to think about and practice using more stories in your communication. So the first thing is why. So many reasons, I believe. But a few that I will highlight that I see in business quite a lot is, and you can see by some of the images here, there are so many different interactions. And one of them in quite a lot of these is our ability to strengthen your leadership and how stories can help you with that. As I've been sort of saying in some of my remarks so far, they really help to give context and purpose. And in terms of leadership at the Humphrey Group, we believe that leadership is really your ability to inspire others. And so stories give you the opportunity to give your employees, your team, the people that you work with context, maybe to a business decision that you've made. Maybe there's a new strategy that you're implementing. You're reacting to a challenge in the market that you're in. And by telling a story about how you're going to overcome that, it really connects the people that you're speaking with, the people that you're leading, to that decision. And you almost won't have to demand change from them or more productivity, because they'll want to go on that journey with you now that they've heard that story, what that looks like. And our leadership is really reflected by our followers. You know, a great way to get people to believe in your vision and to follow your leadership is through stories that can help others see things the way you do. And as a result, care about that. And that really provides a deeper meaning and a connection to your vision for your organization or for your team or for a project. And it shapes a culture. And as a leader of an organization or as a team, culture is so important for connection and for purpose. Stories provide meaning. That's another one that I really think is important to discuss, because so much of us think in metaphors as humans. You know, that once upon a time concept, or those stories that you heard as a children, that concept is so effectively used to connect to something that's relevant and true now. So, you know, we create more purpose when we attach emotions or stories to information. And I find this one is really important in terms of providing meaning. If you're giving feedback to someone on something, if you're connecting one-on-one with somebody, if you're selling an idea to a client or to, you know, an internal team, you're maybe shaking things up in your organization with a new idea. This is a great opportunity to bring stories in to sort of provide some meaning to people around that. And I talk about the word inspire quite a lot. So stories are really a great way to help inspire others. As we've been talking about, they're more memorable than often facts and data. They allow you to sort of personalize that data and humanize it and paint pictures, add color, and people then can really start to imagine what is possible. And Reika has talked quite a bit about this at the beginning in terms of, you know, how stories can help us when we're seeking a job, when we're getting into new networks. And the reason why stories are so important in that sense is because they help set you apart. So going to a networking event, when you're going into a job interview, or you reach out to an organization that you'd love to work for, the way you think about your personal narrative, the way you tell your stories to others, it says so much about you, and it gets people's attention. You know, the stories that you tell at work or that you tell about your work experience, they really matter, and they really affect the way others see you. And it gives you really that control over your narrative and your experiences. And so, you know, we're competing constantly with people's phones, with their calendars, with their time. And so being able to have those stories ready when you're in those interactions can be a huge competitive advantage for you and allows you to really talk in a personal way, in a meaningful way about your experiences and how you can shape those. For me, that was a huge thing when I moved from Ireland to Canada and had to sort of translate some of my experiences and help organizations see that even though I didn't have Canadian experience, the stories that I drew on to help highlight some of my skill set was really what set me apart. And so I'm going to pause for a second now, because I think that sort of is where I wanted to highlight the main areas I wanted to highlight around the why of storytelling. So I'll take this moment to check in with you, Reka. What's coming in the chat? Do we have any sort of themes coming in?
Absolutely. So thank you for giving me that time, Neve. But I can, just looking at the chat options, and ladies, just keep your thoughts coming in. But from what I can see, a lot of thoughts around, stories are easier to remember, authenticity, legitimate. They help with trust and credibility, relatable,
Absolutely.
that others can relate to your stories, right? And it helps create a connection. So I thought these were, great ways in which stories can make one stand apart, right? Because one can replicate data, like everyone can talk about the data from the same source, but your story is unique and that sets you apart, right? So those are some of the themes that are coming in and I really like it.
That's great. And it's so true. So much of the work that we do is built around relationships, and relationships are built on the foundation of shared experiences, or how you connect with others based on your different experiences and how difference connects us. And we can only learn about that by understanding each other through our stories and our different makeup and fabric. So I'm delighted to see those are the themes that are coming in. A question that I would love to sort of put to everybody as you continue in the chat is, why do you want to use stories in your communication? Is it to connect with other people more? Is it for job interviews? Like, what are some of the reasons that you're thinking, this is why I want to use stories? So I'll leave that with you as I, and as you share more in the chat, I'm going to move now into the second point of today's webinar, which is when is most effective to insert a story. I'm going to share two factors with you that I strongly believe must be present when you decide to share a story as part of maybe a conversation, as part of a meeting, an interview. And the first thing is, who are your audience? When you've thought about your audience and you believe your story is something that will resonate with them, or you can insert them into that somehow, then this is a great way and a great time to share a story. I mentioned it earlier, that's often maybe you're discouraged to use stories because you've sat through long stories that you haven't really understood the point. You're not sure how it connects to the conversation or to the presentation. And the reason that we want to listen to stories is because we want to understand or strengthen our belief in something. So when we can't relate or don't see ourselves in someone's story, we tend to lose interest. And so stories can often fail in that sense, when they become more about the storyteller than the listener. And so that's something I would encourage you to make sure that when you're thinking about stories and how to bring them into your communication, that you've first asked yourself, who are my audience? What do I want my audience to feel when they walk away from this interaction with me, or when they listen to this story? So that's the first thing, is who your audience is. And the second is your message. And this is so important, and what really makes stories so powerful when it comes to inspiring others, which is a huge part of leadership and communication, especially in sort of business communication or sort of leadership communication. And especially your message is so important when it's connected to a story, when it comes to that piece around the rational and the feeling brain. And so stories become really powerful, but only when you can connect your story to your message. Because really your message in a business communication is going to be the moral of that story. So it's really important to firstly think of that message and then mine your experiences, other stories that you've heard, and how that message then and that story connect. So first thing, your audience. Think about who your audience is, what you want them to feel as part of this communication, and how they will resonate or relate to the story that you're telling. And then your message. So, Rachel, I'll check in with you again on chat. What are some of the things coming in terms of the why of storytelling and why people are interested in or inspired to use or motivated to use stories in their communication?
Right. So initially, I think some of the comments that we got is that it's authentic, it builds credibility in terms of the why, right? In terms of helps build a connection. And then we can see some more comments about who's the audience really. And the audience could be co-workers, or if you're in a meeting that you might be asked to give you your feedback. So it's more of that. And then there's a comment from Diana saying examples would be great, story examples with a message, but I'm not sure if it's fully clear to me.
Sure, yeah. And that's, I'm often hesitant to look to US politics when it comes to giving examples, but there is one that I have found personally very powerful in recent times, and that was a story from that Andrew Cuomo told. And his message really was around, our ability to come together as a nation and the kindness and compassion that we see. And it can be just in small acts. And he used the story about the letter that he received from a Kansas City farmer who talked about his wife and some of the struggles that they've had, and how with the letter he inserted one mask. And with that mask, he said, I want you to give this just one mask to one doctor, one frontline worker. And Andrew used that story then to connect to his message, which was, those acts of kindness, that compassion. And, I'm using this really as an example. I'm sure we all have our opinions on different leaders. So please just think of that really just more as the idea of the story and the ability to see, okay, the audience is our whole nation, and what is the message that I want to get across, and how we can bring personal people and people's lives into this. And I felt that was a really good example of how they did that.
So that was a powerful message, right? That was a powerful story and also recent. So it kind of resonates with all of us, right? And that is exactly what Diana's question was. She said, I'd like to hear an example of a story with a message. So Diana, hopefully you got that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Neve.
Great. All right. So now when it comes to examples, it's really important to me that you start to think about your own examples, because as Rika has mentioned, as what's coming in the chat is there's a part of this that's really about authenticity and relatability, and that comes from your own stories. And so I want you to take a moment now and think of maybe a communication that you have coming up. Maybe, you have a phone call with someone on your team. Maybe you have an interview coming up. And I want you to think about that communication and who your audience is. What is the one message that you have leaving that communication that you would want your audience to remember? And then start to think about, is this a good communication that I could use a story in? So as you do that, I'll continue on here and start to get into more of the how, because as you're thinking about that, I want you to then sort of map that communication opportunity into this framework that I'm going to show you. And this really moves us into our third part and final part of the idea of storytelling and how you can use it in your communication. So,
and quick thought, Neve, do you think, when we talk about job search, usually there's a concept of a cover note, and then there's a resume, and resume is often, a logical kind of a sequence of the experience and qualifications, so on and so forth. But do you think cover note could be really tweaked to tell your story about where you're coming from and where you're going and, you know, where you are in life, and maybe have a story which is compelling? Do you think that's possible? And the framework that you're going to share, do you think that can be applied to some of that process?
I do. And, you know, so the job search process, and even just the whole process of job application or applying for jobs is becoming so much more competitive, and not just because of the volume of candidates, but also in terms of how that process is being, you know, internalized with organizations, and it becomes harder to connect with organizations and know that your resume is going to be at the top. And I feel like the cover letter is a wonderful place to do that. And I think it's a great place to engage the reader. And you may not tell the full story, but you can give sort of that introduction to, this is why you're applying for this job. What is it that makes, how can you connect that to maybe an experience that you've had? You know, I've been passionate about, let's say, you know, working for a tech startup, and I've always been interested in these organizations. And so as soon as I saw this job come up, I knew I had to apply. And so I think there's ways that you can sort of bring that in and connect it to a personal experience of yours, or why you're passionate about this. And then that engages the reader enough to say, wow, I'm interested to see that, you know, this person feels, you know, is so passionate. And then when you get into the interview scenario, that's when you can sort of build on that and start to share more experiences. You know, growing up, I was always interested in startup companies. I'm interested in the evolving tech world, and I've always been curious and reading about it. And then you kind of you don't sort of overwhelm the cover letter with too much detail, but there's certainly an opportunity to sprinkle that in, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I hope that you're thinking about your communication opportunity, who your audience is, what your message is. And so you can see on the screen, this is sort of the framework that I'm going to introduce you to. And as I've been talking about stories, and I've had this feeling myself, I often think well-told stories seem to be sort of just off the cuff. You know, the storyteller just thought of it in the moment and was able to connect it to the message, and it seemed like it just came from the top of their head. But in fact, that is rarely the case when it comes to stories in communication. There is definitely an element of spontaneity or improvisation, and that comes with having to be really present in the moment and finding that right moment to bring the story in. So again, in interviews, when they ask about a specific experience or skill set that you have, being able to think, okay, this is my moment to bring that story in and connect my experience with this story. But those stories that really inspire or move us, they really do that because they all tend to follow similar structure. And that is the structure that I have on the screen for you right now, which we call at the Humphrey Group the story spine. And this is sort of the skeleton, the backbone of your story. It allows you to sort of create, that skeleton framework, and then add sort of the flesh to it, if we want to continue with that analogy, with the details. And so using this, you know, it's 5 points. You can create 5-sentence stories or 50-sentence stories to sort of suit any leadership communication, whether it be a presentation, a conversation, an interview. And so as you're thinking about your own upcoming communication opportunity, the message in your audience, I'll give you an example of how this works. So again, I'm going to say my message is that I really am passionate and believe in the importance of continuous learning for my career growth. And my audience might be, you know, I'm interviewing for a new position, or they may be a group of young people who are really interested in learning more about their career path in a particular organization. So creating an environment, which is the first step of this. I believe in so as you know my message, so what I might do to create that environment is, when I started in my career in the startup world, I didn't have a lot of technical skills. I knew I had an entrepreneurial or innovator's mindset, and I knew I had great ideas, and I was good at strategy. But I knew that starting out, as I progressed in my career, I could potentially face some roadblocks because of my lack of sort of hard technical skills. And as I progressed in my career, that came true. I could see my opportunities starting to plateau. Introducing the event. So what happened? So I decided to start taking a night class and learning how to code. What makes stories really powerful is sort of you keep the audience engaged by having, a complication maybe, or a challenge, or raising the stakes. So in this particular example, it might be, the first few classes, I was just so intimidated. I didn't know what they were talking about. I found it really hard to keep up. And there was a few that I had to leave early. But I managed to get that motivation back that I knew I needed. And I continued with the classes. And what I started to do then is really weave some of that new skill and that language into my conversations with the developers in the company. And not only did they notice, but my boss noticed. So my resolution, my ability then to really speak the language of others in the organization was noted. And it allowed me to actually progress even further in my career and led to a promotion. And so this is why I believe so strongly in continuous learning and relearning and education when it comes to professional growth. So that's sort of an example of how you can see that this is mapped onto this particular structure. In, an interview setting, this may be, you're asked, why did you apply for this job? And let's say it's, you're looking to start at it could be a tech startup, and they ask you that, and you say, oh, well, one way that you could approach that is, I've always wanted to work for a startup organization. This seems like a fantastic opportunity. It's something that I really love to do. Or you could use this structure. And again, like I did in that first example, you could say, growing up, this is something that I was really interested in the tech world. I was always really interested in technology and was always taking things apart. I was always interested in sort of how things were built, especially, maybe if it's more on the technology side or the hardware side, depending. And I was always doing that. And this, as it progressed through sort of my adult life, and I've always been interested in that. And this is why working for an organization like this is, a passion of mine. And so you can sort of draw on some experiences, and I've given sort of a very high level overview, but you can sort of fill in the details in that way, using this framework to help really bring across your passion, bring across your experience, and really relate to the organization. So I'm curious to get any thoughts, Reika, if anything's coming in on the chat. How do people feel about this?
Yeah, so I think it actually personally made me think about some of the stories that I shared in interview situations, or possibly in cover letter, right? Trying to form that connection between why I might be the ideal candidate, and my background that I've done too, instead of just saying I'm passionate about it, saying what is it that I've done in the past that reinforces my passion in this area, right? So, and I think story was really helpful in that. What I see here from some of the participants is there's one comment which really made me think, and it says, in my case, my stories come from personal life experiences. And the example you gave was professional, right? And so I guess the question could be, is how would a story which is based on a personal situation, a personal life experience, could translate itself into a professional interview situation, right? So if you could comment on that. And the second one just to put it out there, is, you know, I guess it's a comment as well, is whether it's in person as well as in writing or over the telephone, the medium, right? It's not that the story can only be used in a particular medium, right? It could be, it transcends whichever medium you're using.
Yeah.
Right? So comment on both of those, I guess, would be helpful.
Sure. So on the personal, the side around, how these have, personal experiences translate into these types. So just to clarify, so it's how personal stories can be used as examples in, say, a business context or in a professional context. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think those are some of actually the best stories that I've heard, is when people, I've heard quite a few, leaders who will share, especially when you're talking about a change or a challenge, or you're learning something new, or the business is going through a change, or you're introducing a new system that everyone's going to have to learn and it's going to take some time. Stories that I've heard that have been so powerful is maybe a story about how you observed your child learning how to ride a bike, or observing your child's first day of school and how nervous they were, knowing that they didn't know anyone, that they were going to have to, and sort of that resiliency. And so, and in your own personal experience, they can be anything like that. And I think the more conversational and more personal that they can be, the more relatable they're going to be. And so again, it really depends on sort of what your message is for those conversations or presentations. And then I think, yeah, you can be as creative as you want to be in terms of then drawing on personal experiences. And so, that's a great way to build connection with people. So again, I think it's sort of depending on what your message is, then it doesn't necessarily have to only draw on your professional stories or experiences. It can, be about, as personal as you want to, of course, being mindful of, who your audience is and how it connects to your message. Does that?
Yeah, and the example that I can think of is in interview situations. I've been asked to introduce myself, and when I said, this is what I did back in Delhi, where I came from, and after I moved here, this is what I've done. And the first question that they ask is, so why did you move from Delhi? Now it's a very personal reason, right? But I think somewhere people want to know why I moved here, what was the anchor. And when I tell them about my daughter who plays tennis, it's a kind of a different conversation or a connection. Either they themselves are a tennis player or has a child that plays tennis. And I completely unrelated, but it's amazing how that connection or that energy gets formed. So one of the follow-up question was, it needs to be relevant or contextual to the conversation. But the example I gave was where it was not relevant to the conversation, right? But it still built some connection. So I would think there's a judgment call, but I think I'll refer that to you.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think that's where, you have to think about, okay, when you're asked a question like that, what do I want to convey in this question? And this goes back to my earlier point around, really you have the control over that narrative, and you have the control of bringing how much of that story, how little of that story into it based on what that message is. And so I love that example, because I'm sure a lot of, we're all asked those kinds of questions. Why are you moving from one organization to another? Why did you move from one country to another? And that's an opportunity to bring in personal experiences, and then of course make that call around what parts of that are relevant to this particular story. How can I connect it to the particular context and situation that I'm in? So I think it's
so one of the question is, how can we make them more engaged to a story? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think trying this structure out is a great way, because it not only does it give it structure, but it keeps it concise too. Because often when we lose people, it's because the story didn't, as I said earlier, they didn't see themselves in it, or they didn't relate to it, or couldn't connect it to where you were going with it and the overall moral of that story and how it related to the message that you were leaving them with. And so I think that's the first part of sort of engagement, is the fact that you've thought about your message and your audience, and that you've been very sort of structured in terms of how you've then delivered that. You've kept it allows you to sort of keep that concise, insert the most important points, factors, color, whatever you want into that. And then I think there's other things that that come into it in terms of sort of your expression and letting some of that come out, not being afraid to sort of show how passionate you are, or bring some of that emotion that's in that story into how you tell it, and tell it, at a pace that people can sort of keep, go along with that experience and that journey with you. So those are kind of a couple of things off the top of my head that I can think about how you can keep people engaged in your stories.
Yeah, there's another comment here. Knowing when it goes against you, or goes in a positive way to who, what, when, and where you're doing it. So to your framework, right? So kind of, while you're sharing a story, but also be aware of what the impact would be. Knowing when it goes against you or goes in a positive way to who, what, when, and where you're doing it. So that's one comment.
Yeah.
How do you use a specific story to answer a broad question such as, tell me about yourself?
Yeah, and I think that's that may take me to the next slide, which I wanted to sort of talk about, which is how you can start to bring stories in and where stories are appropriate. And so let's use that example of, tell me about yourself, because this is something that's great as the second one here as an example story, or even as a grabber story. So with your grabber story, this is your opportunity to build rapport with somebody or create context for someone. So, in conversations or meetings or interviews, when you're asked that question, you can use kind of both of these, I actually have some experiences that I can share with you, and this really will tell you more about who I am. Or you can sort of, like you used, Rekha, I've moved from India, or for me, I moved from Ireland, and my reasons for this. And sort of those are the ways that you can sort of bring stories in to help people understand who you are. And then you can sort of take it where you want to. I think when you're to ask that question, then you kind of decide, what are the most important things that I want this person to know about me? And that also brings in the context piece. Like if you're in an interview, you want them to know who you are as a person, but also who you are as a professional. So what are some of those experiences that you can draw on in those particular cases? Whereas if it's, I don't want to, because I know that was the particular example that was given. So I think that's, so the way to bring that in is, maybe I'll tell you three things about me. The first thing is sort of where I come from, what I like to, sort of about my career experience, and then you take them on that journey. And then another thing might be, and I'll tell you about sort of why I'm passionate about this particular industry that you're interviewing for, let's say, and then you tell a story about that. So you can kind of set that structure for yourself, and then interject sort of a story related to each of those pieces that you're telling about yourself.
Sure. And I'll share questions as they come in. Just quick time check. Are we doing okay in terms of time? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so let me go through this, and then, we can check in on sort of final questions that are coming in. So as I give you this framework, I want you to be able to see where there's opportunities for you to see and to identify where you can bring stories in. And of course, I think interviews, networking situations are a wonderful opportunity for that. And those, can be what we call grabber stories. So, this is where you build rapport with someone, where you give them context. So these are fantastic stories when you're introducing yourself, or someone asks you to tell them about you, or Yeah, so just kind of that introduction maybe, or to a presentation, you have an idea that you want to share, and so you decide to start it off. So it's really the whole word of grabber is grabbing your audience's attention. Example stories is when you really need to prove a point. So you have facts, or you have information or data. And so this could be, you're using examples to reiterate that, or to provide context. Or another version of example stories is, like the one that I used when I said the importance of continuous learning. So for example, when I started out my career, I went back to night school and I did this, and this helped me in this way. And that's why continuous learning is so important. So example stories are great when you have, that you want to really make a point or drive home your message in a very personal way. And then woven stories really brings together all of these three so that you can sort of create a theme. So you introduce that story early. And that's sort of the example that I was drawing on, which is, maybe you look at examples of, if we were to look at, maybe you're introducing a new system in your organization, and you're explaining to people how there's going to be change coming, or they're going to have to learn something new, and how this can come with challenges. How you can relate to then, those examples I used of observing children learning how to do new things and how resilient they are, or you observe someone else in another organization who is resistant to change and what that did. So that's where you can sort of bring it in and you can weave it out. So we're going to be seeing this change. And an example of that is someone or somebody who has done that. And then as you're making your points, that's when you can sort of bring back other, stages of that story. And then at the end again, so you can sort of weave it in and out. So yeah, to sort of wrap those three things up, which is sort of why tell stories, when to tell them, and then how to use this framework in terms of telling your story. It's important to know and not get discouraged when it comes to stories. And as we start to think about what stories do I have, there are so many that we can look to as examples, and they may seem like fairy tale stories. If you even look at some of the big business stories around how Disney started or how Ben and Jerry started, and they all seem like these great fairy tales. But in fact, a lot of them have that same structure, that same message. And we can all relate to them at our own level and our own experiences and perspective. And one thing is, don't be afraid to look at sort of your experiences, your challenges you've had, the adversity you've been through, what you've observed other people doing, and how you can use all of that to really bring those into your communication. I find that people enjoy those as part of the stories, as feeling like there was a challenge, or there's something that they want to know what happens next, and they want and with that they're even more willing to go along with that journey or that story with you. But really what I wanted to leave you with is that your stories are so powerful when it comes to connecting and inspiring others. As powerful as the information that's stored in your brain, as powerful as the most well-crafted argument that you have, and really as powerful as the data that you can fit into a presentation or an Excel. And I would argue that they're even more powerful. So I encourage you to think about why you want to use stories, when you can use them in some of the upcoming communication opportunities that you have. And then of course, testing out this framework and seeing how it works for you. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Neve. That was so insightful, interesting, and relevant. I think there are a couple of other comments. We probably can spend a minute on it. Mm-hmm. There's a comment that says, storytelling tells a lot about you, including where you've been, done, and why. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are a lot of messages coming in saying, it's a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I really liked one which said, get to the point. Storytelling doesn't mean that you can just go on and on and on. Just right. It doesn't mean you have your audience for unlimited time. Just be specific, sure. Be very sharp, and just get to the point, right?
Exactly. And I think that's where, message comes into it. Knowing that where you're bringing stories in and why, and having that message will make sure that you do include only those specific details that are related to that message. And to the other comment that you made, I think it's, yeah, related to your narrative. It gives you, stories are a great way to shape your narrative on who you are, where you come from, you know, what is it that you want other people to know about you. And it builds rapport, connection, so many great things. So yeah, great to see those comments coming in.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Neve.
Okay, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank you.